Mistrustful. Let's win.
With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. She's one of our favorites, Sarah Stook. The tables have turned. We have been giving her all sorts of well-deserved heat because of the political situation over in... Did we decide on Omni Shambles? Is that what we're going to call the last couple of weeks in UK politics?
I mean, that's just such a fantastic word. So, yeah, and that's what it is. It is one of the biggest Omni Shambles ever. Yeah,
Omni Shambles. We've seen 3 prime ministers in short order, including a new king on top of that. But today, fair's fair. She's going to take some shots at us from over yonder. She's going to talk about 10 races in our midterm elections, which, frankly, we've got some mess of our own. Let's just all be grown-up adults about this. Before we get to that, Sarah, how are you? How are things over yonder?
I'm good. We're enjoying quite mild weather for the season, which is good because heating prices are ridiculous. However, I'm northern, so the heating doesn't need to go on yet.
We'll ship you some firewood or some coal or something. We'll work it out. All right, you're writing in the Mallet. Now, for folks that aren't familiar with Sarah, she also works for her Elections Daily here in the States, so she does know what she's talking about on this. Frequent contributor to this here program. Go watch all her good talks we have in the archives. Let's start big picture, though. When you're looking at these midterm races, you pick 10 because you always do these lists, and we always have you on to talk about this list. What were you looking for? Was it interesting? Was it the loud races? Was it the personalities? Was it the close races? What was your criteria here?
I think a lot of it was races that aren't particularly definitive. I wanted things that would be close or, toss-ups, for example. And then, the races that are... You've got the races that are really in the media, such as, Ohio and Pennsylvania, ones where there have been very interesting debates, and also, the issues, because inflation is a massive issue in the United States. Abortion is another one, slightly less so, but still there. And then obviously each individual state race governor will have their own issues potential. So state like Alaska with energy, for example. So I wanted sort of different ones, and then like I said, different personalities, because there are some really, high profile figures, people, rising stars in the past, even if they don't win this time. Perhaps even could be a future president in there for all we know. Gosh, I hope not with some of these lot, but you never know.
Yeah, after the Joe Biden and Donald Trump back-to-back elections, I'm not going to rule out anybody for the presidency anytime soon. I've learned my lesson, folks. I'm going to get out of the prediction business for a while as far as who's going to be president down the road. Let's start with New York. This one's interesting because you have an incumbent that's not elected, Kathy Hochul. She took over when Cuomo finally found a scandal he couldn't wiggle his way out of and got deposed. So she's running against Lee Zeldin. This is a name that is pretty well known in New York politics. He's a problematic candidate, but there's some headwinds going on here. Again, she wasn't elected on her own, so she's kind of trying to figure out how to do this campaign thing. Zeldin, of course, it's going to be a red year for the Republican Party, so he's riding that. It's New York, so crime's an issue. This is way closer than it probably ought to be, is kind of the long and the short of this one.
Yeah, I mean, the New York State is very Democrat as well. Obviously, you've got, individual Congress and, state assemblies that are red. However, as generally it's a blue state, and because it is dominated by New York, which is the largest city by population, it's a bit like Portland in Oregon, Chicago in Illinois. It's like the center, and obviously cities tend to be very blue, especially one as diverse as New York. So, and obviously the Republicans could make inroads upstate, but they really haven't. And even then, would it really balance it out? So, like you said, yes, it should not be this close. I think Kathy Hochul will win. I don't think that her opponent will, but I think Hochul will win. But it will be a lot closer than it should have been. And yes, the red wave will help. At the end of the day, I think New York is maybe not as blue as California, but it's still a very reliable seat for the Democrats.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think she holds this. Zeldin's making it closer mostly due to the environment more than him particularly, but we'll see what happens. You never know. From a race where you have somebody who's never run for office before to a race where it's an actual literal rerun of the previous race down in Georgia. Brian Kemp, the sitting governor in Georgia, Stacey Abrams. This is part 2. They're doing it again. This has not kind of gone the way folks have thought it would, though. This was a very, very close election. It was so close that Stacey Abrams sort of soft pedal conceded, never actually came out and said it until quite a bit later. This was very close first time. This has actually opened up a little bit. Kemp looks like he might win this somewhat comfortably. And comfortable is relative here, but instead of the, few 100,000 votes here, he may win this thing by 3, 4, 5 points now. Interesting replay race down in Georgia.
Very much so. Obviously, Georgia went blue last election in 2022, statewide. The Senate obviously had to do a runoff because it was so very close. And because Georgia's still newly blue, that does benefit the Republicans. And, a lot of people on the left praise Stacey Abrams for doing a heck of a lot for voter registration, especially among the ethnic minority community. I mean, she's not dumb. She went to an Ivy League school. So, she's not exactly, a opponent they can dismiss easily. And like you said, it was very close last election. That being said, I do feel a lot of people on the left sort of overemphasize her role. Georgia is still fundamentally a southern traditional state. And that, just because a candidate is well known, well established, it's kind of like Jeremy Corbyn here. The only reason he did so well in the 2017 election was because Theresa May and the Tories did shockingly bad. Maybe perhaps a better leader would have done better for Labour. And he's also lost the 2019 election, Stanley, though again, I think another Labour leader would have also lost. And I think that overemphasis, you're seeing a lot of support from out of Georgia, which is fine. People can have an opinion about it. But at the end of the day, it is the Georgians who are going to be voting. It's not the media and other politicians. It's Georgians. So they're not going to be represented by the more sort of managerial class, as it were. Hence why I think Kemp is going to win.
Yeah, Georgia's interesting because it is changing. I don't think it's changing that fast. I think Kemp wins this. We're going to talk about that Senate race in a minute because we may see some split ticketing on this thing. We'll talk about that in just a second. Sarah Stook joining us. All right, Arizona's probably one of the messier, louder, messy. I'm going to say messy twice because it's a mess out in Arizona. Doug Ducey has been the governor out there. He's term limited, so he's standing aside. Katie Hobbs and Carrie Lake. Carrie Lake is, of course, a former TV anchor. That would be a presenter for those of you from Grimsby. She's very good on a microphone. She's charismatic. She's also problematic for a lot of folks. But Katie Hobbs has kind of run and hid and not done well. She's not as good on TV. That's pretty much this whole race. Carrie Lake looks like she's starting to pull away a little bit here. How did you see it?
I think, like you said, Carrie Lake is very good on the media, which I think is quite important. If you look at some of the former presidents, Bill Clinton, very charismatic. Obama, saw some speeches, and recently he's still a phenomenal speaker. Ronald Reagan, former actor. And also, you don't have to be a great presence to be a great politician, but I think it sort of helps the image. You don't want a cold face. You want someone dynamic and exciting. And I think the fact that she's not really worked in politics helps. I think people are getting more excited about outsider images on both sides, Donald Trump, AOC, and Katie Hobbs has got a bit of a past with Arizona's interesting. Traditionally red went blue last cycle, still very much the home of moderate conservatism in the way of John McCain. But now the candidate is either too closely related or too far away. Carrie Lake has got Trump's endorsement, but he's endorsing conservatives and Republicans across the station. Katie Hobbs isn't exactly, she hasn't been debating. A lot of people have criticised her for being quite quiet. A lot of Democrats refuse to take part in the race because she's very much a reluctant competitor, which is strange in a seat that she could, if you try, she could probably get. It's not like a deeply red state. It's possible. I mean, it's blue at the moment. We've got senators who are blue. So yeah, I think it's really strange. I find it very strange that she doesn't really seem to want it.
And it contrasts so much because Carrie Lake wants to fight everybody all the time on every single thing. She's blatantly saying she's not going to concede the election if she loses because there's no way she can lose. She's more Trumpy than Trump in some ways. She is all in on the Trump style of politics. She wants to fight everybody. So then when you get somebody that doesn't want to really be out there like Hobbs is, it just contrasts it even more and makes it look even worse, for lack of a better political term. It just makes it look bad when you got somebody who wants to fight all the time and you got somebody else that seems reluctant to fight. It's just glaring.
Exactly. Politics is about fighting, and if they think that one isn't going to fight for their state like the other is, if it's going to come down to infrastructure projects and other things for Arizona, if you've got someone who doesn't really care, then you're not going to vote for them because they're not going to benefit your state, whereas the other one will. You may not like her style. And I think, again, that's the appeal for Trump. His rhetoric can be a bit much, but you got the impression that if he cared about something, he really cared. And he was very, I'm doing this for America. His whole image was very populist, which I think is sort of the flavour at the moment, across the world. Missing that, obviously, the Brazilian elections just occurred. You had a populist right versus populist left.
Sarah Stook joining us. You mentioned Portland a minute ago. Oregon's not going to really elect a Republican governor, are they? This is another one of those where this probably shouldn't be that close, but Kate Brown's term limited. Kate Brown came in on the wave of a corruption scandal. She's had a few issues herself. Tina Kotek isn't exactly setting the world on fire, but again, this is Portland and Oregon. They're not going to really elect a Republican governor, are they?
Well, if you look at the gubernatorial races over the past few cycles, the margins have slimmed down significantly for the Democrats. And yes, Portland does make up a lot of Oregon. And, Portland, is seen by the right-wing press as some evil communist hellhole with loads of homelessness and crime. I mean, to an extent, it's true. Portland has a lot of problems. It's sort of the cliche of the hipster cafe drinking dog cafe kind of place, very left wing, would not vote for a Republican, would vote for a dead donkey if it was representing the Democrats. But there's other places in Oregon. But also, if you live in Portland and you are directly affected by crime, if you can't afford a place to live, if you've been made homeless, or you're worried about the homeless encampments, the Democrats seem to have done nothing. There's no houses being built, there's not really any help for the homeless, there's still a lot of crime. Then you're going to think, well, why don't I just vote for the alternative? There are some places that will always be very right or very left. If you look at San Francisco, is always going to be really Democrat. That's just like a fact of life. Versus deep rural Missouri, it will be red. Portland, I think, could change, but I think it will be outside of Portland in Oregon where we will see change. I think Portland, I still think it's pretty left, and it will depend on rural, suburban, city turnout as well. If people are thinking, well, I could never vote Republican, but I don't want to vote Democrat, they'll just stay at home or vote third party.
Yeah, we've actually done a whole episode on Portland with two of our good friends that live in Portland. And it's funny when you talk to them because they're like, no, it's nothing like what's portrayed on TV. But then the problems, if the right wing really wanted to attack Democrats, there's a lot of problems. And these are both, left-leaning Democratic guys saying, look, we've screwed this city up. There's a lot of issues here, but you never get to the issues because they're so busy with the stereotypes.
You couldn't find a Republican in Portland at the moment.
Well, there's some there that you can find them anywhere, but Portland's always fascinating because you have that stereotype and it's not the same as it is on the ground. But then if you actually take 5 minutes to get beyond the stereotype, you can get to some real issues where you really could hit them, just people are too lazy to do it. It's really interesting. I think what you're saying has some merit. Whenever you have a deep blue state, every now and then there's just a cycle where the apathy catches up because they're like, oh, it's going to be, so it drives your voter turnout down. Every now and then you can sneak up on somebody, but I agree with you. I don't think this is the case. I think it just gets closer than it should be, and they'll hold that as well. Sarah Stook joining us. Okay, here's an ugly one. We just did a whole episode on this last week. Our friend Eric Garcia came in on the debate, which is one of the most cringiest political things I've ever seen in my entire life. John Fetterman, Mehmet Oz, Dr. Oz, Pennsylvania. Look, I do this full time. I'm just going to say, I don't think anybody has a clue how this election is going to go, because I think we're so far off the map now. I don't think the polls matter. I don't think anybody knows which ways this thing's going to break, because I don't think we've ever seen anything remotely like this.
Yeah, I mean, this is coming from a country where politics is going a bit crazy as well. But, Pennsylvania is probably the most interesting. And I think it's the one, in the UK was sort of, there's news articles about the midterms, not really focusing on particular races. But when it does, Pennsylvania tends to pop up more. Maybe because it's so, insane. But
is Oz known over there? I know he's a TV star here. Is that something that's been syndicated or is trickled over there?
I don't think he's particularly well known, but I was watching a film the other day and it mentioned Dr. Oz's show, and obviously this is like a film from a few years ago, and I was thinking, wow, now he'll be known as possibly as being a senator. But no, I don't think he's particularly well known here. It's the same with TV stars here. You guys wouldn't have heard of them, so no, it's not really well known. I think it's just the fact it's in a crackers race in a swing state.
So for the backstory, in case somebody's living under a rock and doesn't know, 2 days before the primary, Fetterman had a health issue, was what we were all told. Turns out that he had a stroke. Then it turned out that it was a pretty significant medical event. He's been doing rehab. He got back on the campaign trail somewhere around August. He has some limitations from the stroke. And the debate was a disaster on all sides. Fetterman was obviously not put in a position. Let me be kind here. He was put in a position to not succeed. I don't know why. Just take the hit for doing the debate. I have no idea why his advisors thought this was a good idea. On top of that, you get Oz being a snarky jerk about the whole thing and making it even worse. And like everybody's like, well, Fetterman shouldn't be here, but man, that guy's a jerk. I'll just go back to where we started. I have no idea where this is going to go. I think maybe this is one of those things where it's a red year, so maybe Oz gets enough backwind to push him over the line with Fetterman's issues. If it was all straight up and Fetterman was healthy, I think he probably beats him 5 to 10 points, but he's clearly not. Those images are hard to overcome. I'm sympathetic to the disability stuff. I got nothing. I'm not guessing. I think this is something that's probably going to be studied for a long time as far as an outlier in politics, because this is just bonkers.
Yeah, I mean, I agree about, I think the thing is you should rightly not mock a disability, but at the same time, he shouldn't be protected because of it. We look at Joe Biden, you've got armchair psychiatrists saying he's got dementia. I mean, regardless of whether we'll ever get a fair diagnosis, basically the gold water rule, don't diagnose if you don't know a patient personally. He clearly has memory issues. Fetterman had a stroke, and that's not like a minor heart attack or something. That's going to affect cognitive function, memory, mobility, speech. And I didn't watch the whole debate because I don't think he can get it over here, but I watched the clip and I just thought, he's clearly lost. And I think a lot of people blaming his wife as being a bit of a Lady Macbeth, and then they're thinking, well, if something happens to him, God forbid, while he's in office, then the governor will have to replace him with somebody. Who are they going to replace him with? Will it be his wife, kind of like a John Cindy McCain kind of thing? And yeah, so I think I don't think dropping out now would obviously be a bit of a disaster. I don't even know what would happen if he did right now, how they would replace him. And I think, if the voters voted for him in the primary, that's their prerogative and they have a right to that candidate. But at the same time, I have severe reservations about his ability. And a lot of journalists have covered it up. And now these journalists are eating their words after watching that debate. That debate pushed me in the camp that Oz will win. And I just think he needs rest. He needs to look after himself. Being a senator is a very hard job, and perhaps he will recover. Perhaps he can run next time. He's not exactly an old man. He has plenty of political years left. I just kind of feel sorry for him, and my anger isn't necessarily at Fetterman, it's at those who are propping him up, because I think it's wrong.
I really wonder too, if this was any candidate but Oz, and frankly, in my opinion, I don't think he's fit for office with his Turkish connections, his charlatanism as a doctor. Like he has no qualifications for the office either. At least Fetterman's been an elected official and worked his way up a little bit, even with his other issues that we could bring up. I really wonder if it was anybody other than Oz, if this would play out differently. I really
think
do.
It'd be more of a cakewalk for the Republicans. I think, like you said, they're not really amazing candidates either way. I mean, Fetterman has also got his issues beyond his health issues. His family basically paid for his business and his life until he was 49, which is kind of generous parents.
He's just different.
It's kind of like he's a bit of a kind of like a Kennedy in the whole
bon vivant. I think those French people say it.
Yeah, trust funds. Then you got Dr. Oz also has his issues, like you said, his medical thing, practice, some of the things he said. I'm sure we're probably better candidates for both sides. However, if that's the primaries, that's what people vote for. You can say, you get who you voted for. So like I said, I do believe Oz will win. I reckon it will be very close. I don't think it's going to be like a landslide by any stretch of the imagination, but I just feel kind of sorry for Pennsylvanians either way, really. You're in a state with so much focus because it's generally a swing state, and you've got two presidents from Pennsylvania. One is widely considered the worst president. The other isn't doing too well at the moment. So I think the Pennsylvanians need to get some good politicians out, really.
Or Pennsylvania. Let's go back down to Georgia. Raphael Warnock's the sitting senator. You already mentioned it. The runoff elections in Georgia were an absolute disaster. That's probably the crack in the Trump wall, if there is one in the Republican Party, because he no doubt made that situation 10 times worse than it needed to be. Probably cost him 2 Senate seats. This was one of them. He's the incumbent. I got to back up for a minute, though. That recall election, who's another problematic candidate. Both of these candidates have accusations against them in their personal lives. Herschel Walker is, of course, let's just call it what it is. He's a celebrity candidate. He doesn't have any qualifications. It's just a straight up celebrity candidate because he's a Georgia football star. Yes, that means a whole lot in the state of Georgia. Let's all be adults here. That does mean something. The debate was what it was. We had the fake badge come out. We had Warnock getting hit on certain things. Herschel Walker, very smartly, because he has taken outside advice, played down his expectations, which puts Senator Warnock in a position where he can't win even if he wins, because if you don't knock the guy out, now you look bad. That worked, so that helped Herschel Walker out a little bit. This is going to be a very, very tight race. We already talked about the Abrams-Kemp race. They're going to be tied together probably, but we could see a split here where, and you kind of came to the same conclusion, is we could get a Kemp governor and still get Raphael Warnock as a senator from Georgia.
That's my prediction. Warnock, he's very, as he's got, a religious background, a lot of people have pressed him on the abortion issue because obviously Roe v. Wade has, like, the overturn came out, and that's been sort of a massive discussion. And that's sort of the Democrats' main sticking point, because they can't really tack on inflation because they're the party in control. Abortion, however, they can. And then people are saying, you are a minister, you are religious, why are you advocating for abortion? And, African Americans pretty much uniformly vote Democrat. However, they are a lot more socially conservative on abortion and LGBT rights. So it's kind of a bit of a difference, as it were. He's got opinions you would expect more from perhaps a white liberal as opposed to a black liberal, for example. But Walker, accusations that he's paid for abortions. There's been so many of these family-friendly figures who are anti-LGBT rights, abortion, and, affairs, who have turned out to have done these things, that have been arrested for extramarital affairs, paying for abortions, solicitation, same-sex relationships. I mean, if you look at Newt Gingrich, cheated on both of his first wives with the next one. So he's hardly a figure of morality and greatness, even compared to Bill Clinton. However, I don't think people really care as much. Evangelicals went out in droves for Trump, even though they would, if that was a Democratic candidate, it'd probably be a bit more, oh, he's so awful how he's treated his wives and children. So whether people care or not, you don't vote on a candidate. I mean, Boris Johnson was known to have affairs, yet he was very popular. I think the person much less if they've had affairs, but that's personally my traditional views. However, I wouldn't not vote for someone if they had an affair. The abortion thing, I think that's hypocritical. Again, would I my vote based on it? I'm not entirely sure it would.
1 or 2 points, though, would probably change this race. I think that is a 1 or 2 point issue for him. I know it's not going to lose a lot of the hardcores, but he'll lose a lot of those marginal voters for him. So I think Warnock does sneak this one out. And this is where Kemp survives the changing tides in Georgia politics. I think Warnock benefits from them and a little bit of the purpling down there.
A confident advantage, I do feel, is a real thing because your name's already out there.
And it's only been 2 years. And that, again, that race that he won, that got people, especially in the right-wing press and folks on the right, they went places you don't go. You mentioned him being a minister. Yeah, there's a debate about, because he's a progressive minister, and that's a theological debate. People on the outside of that don't want to hear your opinion on that debate, though. It's one of those things. So that got really personal, and that was only 2 years ago. I don't think those folks have forgotten. I think he's got just enough to pass this one off. I agree with you. I think he wins and they hold the seat. All right. Personal bias is on the table here. I cannot even pretend to be unbiased when it comes to this individual. I have plenty in print, media, and elsewhere that I just, if the guy was drowning, I'd probably chuck him a center block to try to help him out.
I can already guess who you mean.
The Senate race in Ohio, boy, is this a hot mess. We've talked about Democrats having a tough slog. Tim Ryan's overperforming. He's probably still not going to win, but he's overperforming because this was a Trump state pretty handily, 8 or 9 points. J.D. Vance, this is not my opinion. This is sourced. Unlike Walker, who finally took some help and straightened his campaign out, Vance has refused help. He doesn't want anybody's outside opinion. He doesn't want any help. He's run a terrible campaign. Ryan should not be within 5, 6, 7, 8 points of Vance. Vance should be running away with this, but he's not. Now, I don't personally like him because he's slighted my culture, made money off it, and then disappeared without helping anybody out. But that's just me. This race should not be close, but it is.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I can imagine. I mean, I don't really know much about his book or his film beyond sort of what people say, how it's sort of a bit paternalistic about Appalachian culture, about people who aren't as educated, and I can completely understand that coming from an area where there's like a lower amount of higher education, we're not particularly educated. I can completely understand that, and I completely agree. I really do not like that view of the less educated voter.
If somebody grew up in Knightsbridge and wrote a book about Grimsby, that's what you're dealing with.
Exactly, that's what it is. I mean, yes, he grew up there, but then he went to like Yale or Harvard or whatever, and is now a venture capitalist. Like, this is not a dude who grew up and never left. This is a dude who, and you can respect him for pulling himself up. And I feel in America, voters really appreciate a person who started out with nothing and rose above the ranks. And I don't begrudge him for that. But at the same time, totally understand. I think his views are also problematic. But he will still win because, it's a red year. He's in Ohio, which is still fairly sort of Midwestern shucks conservatism. It's not as deep as, like Missouri or whatever. But I think it's a win for him. Tim Ryan's kind of, I feel like a bit of a meh candidate. Like, he's not a bad candidate, but he's not good either. He's not really put himself out there. He's not really made himself look bad either, though. But is that what you need? A candidate that's not too controversial? I feel, that's what voters look for in 2020 with Trump versus Biden. Obviously, they didn't really get what they wished for, but the example is there. Perhaps sometimes you need a normal candidate.
Yeah, I think Tim Ryan's trying really hard. I think he's kind of a throwback moderate Democrat in a lot of ways. I know they're painting him as a super liberal, but he's really not. 10, 15 years ago, he's a lock for high office in the state of Ohio because that's a normal Ohio voter. The Ohio today that's been trending redder and redder and redder, he's just on the outside looking in. He's on the wrong side of the slack side. So I agree with you. I think Vance pulls that out. God help us. He will be in the U.S. Senate. I would rather him not be, but, is what it is. And
just move to
Ohio for you. That's Ohio for you. They always make bad decisions and people up there. Sarah Stook. We kid those who we love. Don't get upset, Ohio folks. You go to a house race. Sarah Stook joining us. We go to a house race out in California. This is the 21st district out here. David Valado. He's going to run in California 22. He's running against Rudy Solis. Why did you pick this house race? Obviously, California is a blue state, but there's some real red enclaves, especially in the House, the way it's districted out. There's still some, those old Reagan California districts out there. Why did you pick this race to highlight?
Well, to be quite honest, I was trying to sort of split between gubernatorial races, Senate races, and House races. I wanted to do a bit of each. And because they're not as prominent over here, like I had to dig in a little bit more to see, what's sort of going on. So I thought, okay, I'll go for this one, especially because redistricting's happened, and that's really changed the cards for a lot of it. The Valdao, so how do you say his name? The Republican bloke.
I can't say it correctly either, probably, but David Valadao is how I'm saying it. I'm probably saying it wrong. Valadao. It's spelled Valadao. I'm saying Valadao. If I'm saying it wrong, I apologize. And then Rudy Solis.
Portuguese and Hispanic majorities in quite a lot of America, but also Portuguese, Brazilian is still a rather large chunk of the earth, though less so. So I think that's actually kind of interesting because there's some sort of similar linguistics and culture, but it's still a separate language. But I just think that's really interesting that it's a Portuguese one when you perhaps automatically assume Hispanic if you didn't really know the name that well. But yeah, so because of the redistricting, the previous candidates have said, I'm not interested in running, so he's technically got that district. So it's going to be sort of, he's an interesting one because he voted to impeach Trump, which is like a big no-no in the Republican Party at the moment because Trump still holds a lot of sway. However, probably a lot of voters don't really care about that anymore. That's like in the past. So I think he can get away with it, really. And plus, they know that no other Democrat would probably win that seat. That's why the Republicans refused to put anyone else up. They said, okay, no one else would win, so you might as well keep him.
It'll be interesting if he can get away with that, if he were to win and then to run again 2024. If you got Trump on the ballot and now you have to deal with it, it'd be interesting to see if that comes back up. Okay, this is one we actually covered with our friend Sarah Monteblano a couple days ago. Alaska's at-large. Of course, they get one delegate for at-large because while it's the largest state, the population's pretty low. Mary Peltola, and we're projecting a little bit. She's actually already won the seat, but because of the really screwiness, Don Young, who'd been the representative up there for forever, died. And he died during the primary process. So they had to have the regular election and the special election back to back. So this is a really screwy election where, she's already won one of them. Now she's going to try to win the other one. It looks like she'll win it again. She was up against Sarah Palin and Nick Bajik. Y'all, we've been making fun of y'all's system. Our system where you got to run for the same seat twice within 2 months of each other.
I find
pretty
that
funny.
ridiculous for the space of a few months. Like they couldn't just have like a sort of a seat warmer for a bit. I find that bizarre, but
yeah, it's a strange situation. But the headline here is a state that's traditionally, It's red, but it's just like we talked with our friend Sarah about. It's not a MAGA red. It's not a Trumpian red. It's a very unique state, very independent streak. Doesn't really fit neatly into a lot of categories. So now you're going to have a quasi-independent senator, Lisa Murkowski, who of course caucuses with Republicans, but because she wanted to avoid the primary battles, she endorsed Mary Peltola, who's a Democrat. Interesting stuff going on up in the last frontier.
That's peeved off a lot of Republicans from what I've seen, who think she's a bit of a traitor for advocating for a Democrat. But as you said, Alaska's a very fascinating place. I think a lot of the hatred from the Democrats comes from, I listened to a podcast about it not long ago, and I can't remember the specific details, but the Democrats were more wary about gun ownership in Alaska and energy independence and things, and Alaskans were like, no. So hence why they're Republican, because very pro Second Amendment, because in Alaska you probably need it. Let's be fair, if anybody needs a gun, it's the Alaskans. Energy as well, and it's so isolated.
Takes a while for a cop to get to you. You kind of got to just handle it yourself.
And if you've got a moose in front of you, bada bing, bada boom, you got to go for it, haven't you? Because I wouldn't want to be mauled by a moose, would you, or a polar bear? So Mary Peltola is, she's pro Second Amendment. She's pro energy independence. She's still got liberal views on things like abortion, which I don't know if that's really as big an issue, which I might come on to a bit later. But she's got what they want. She's independent. She's not sort of beholden to the main Democratic Party. Sarah Palin is a very controversial figure. I do feel some kinship with her. We're both brunettes with glasses called Sarah. Great. But, she's a bit of a Marmite figure. I think she's great as like a speaker. She's she's not eloquent, but she's very passionate, which I do admire about her. She's very, in it to win it, all for it. But I think, because of Alaska's ranked voting system, even she said she's going to vote for Mary Peltola as her second choice. People are actually less pissy about that because it's the second choice, unlike Lisa Murkowski, who said first choice. But there's also a second Republican, but I don't think anyone really cares about him, to be honest. So
yeah, and there's real life heat. The backstory there is the Republican folks are actively attacking Bajik, even though he's on the ballot. So that's one of those interesting. Look, Murkowski's untouchable now. There was a spell in there where they thought they could get her. That's why she feels free to do this. She's going to be a swing vote in the Senate as long as she chooses
like Susan
to be there.
Collins.
Yeah, she's going to be this is why we're talking about, look, if the Senate margin is 1 or 2 votes, it really hasn't changed any, because you still got the Mansions and the Murkowskis and you've got these swing votes that could go either way on these issues. So she feels very secure. That's why she gets away with that, and she can start calling the shots for people she wants. And it's going to be interesting times up there. Sarah Stook. One more here. This one is very interesting as well. This one actually got quite a bit of press coverage back during the primaries. Myra Flores, I hope I'm saying this correctly. Dan Sanchez, this is Texas's 34th congressional district. So we're going to the opposites here. We're going from the northern boundary of America down to the southern border, literally. This is a fascinating case. This is a area that has been traditionally Democratic, tending Republican, and it's trending Republican because the margins in the Latino and Hispanic communities down on the borders are trending red. And that's kind of the story here.
Exactly. The Hispanics were never sort of a monolithic voting bloc in the same way African Americans are, but they certainly trended Democrat. And if you look at it, the Republicans have been trying to get them for a while, and you can understand why. Latinos tend to be more socially conservative, especially if they're Catholic, on abortion. They're very family-oriented people, which I think is something I really admire about them, actually. But fundamentally, I think a lot of the people on the left assume that they would be left-wing because of the immigration issue, but they kind of forget that the vast majority of those people are either born in the US or entered legally. So if other people are coming in illegally after you come in legally, you're going to be a bit annoyed about that, aren't you? And that's not to say that they're going to suddenly all vote Republican. People still vote Democrat, and I still think the Republicans should be very careful and not, take them for granted. Same way, Democrats shouldn't take, Asian Americans, Muslim Americans, African Americans for granted. But I think you playing on the Hispanic vote is essential as they're an expanding demographic. In some areas, they might be actually more Hispanics and Caucasian people, Spanish is a growing language. You've got to, play into demographics. So if they play their cards right and they have a good voting bloc, and hopefully people who can, speak for such a large community. I think if a community is that large, they need representation and spokespeople within the nation.
Yeah. Sarah Stook. We're going to link to the entire piece at the Mallard. It's her 10 races to watch. I would be remiss if I did not ask you this question. However, last time we talked, we were breaking down movies about historical events or prestige series we wanted to see. So I have to ask you, Sarah Stook, my good friend, are we going to get a Liz Truss versus the Lettuce movie?
It would be like a great... There's already people like British people like casting and like a fantasy casting. Bless her heart, she's not that interesting, so she would not be very compelling. It's kind of like doing a presidential film on, like, I don't know, William Henry Harrison or somebody who was a little bit dull. You don't do it on the dull people, you do it on the interesting people. There'll be Boris. I mean,
don't be knocking Tippecanoe now. He at least had a nickname.
He had a nickname, but he only died after 30 days, and the Simpsons called him a mediocre president, so...
I don't know if we can judge the guy on 30 days and he died. I mean, that's a little unfair.
But that's kind of like the libertarian dream, isn't it? He did nothing. That is like an anarchist libertarian, like, yes, he's my favorite because he did nothing and just died.
He was the anti-Wilson who,
He's the anti-Wilson. He's like, I don't know if Harrison was like racist or anything, whereas Woodrow Wilson was very horrible to minorities. But yeah, kind of the opposite in several different ways. They're both from Virginia, so...
It's funny, too, because we were talking about the Fetterman situation, and I hate everything about that. I hate that the debate went forward. I hate how people treated it. I hated the disability discussion, which went way off the rails instead of where it should have been. People don't realize Wilson had a stroke in office and we're not even really sure how disabled he was because Edith Wilson blocked him off and became the gatekeeper. Are we ever going to really know how disabled he was? And again, this is, different era. Modern era, we would have never known about it. Kind of like FDR, they hid that he couldn't walk. Kennedy, they hid everything, that the guy's health was terrible and all the stuff he was doing. You can go down the list. All kinds of presidents have hid all sorts of things. You can't hide anything now. You really can't.
Yeah, I mean,
that's kind of the lesson of that, isn't it?
I think nowadays we're a lot more accommodating about disabled people, which is, I think, wonderful. I think Bush Senior's Americans with Disabilities Act was a really fundamental cornerstone of civil rights for the disabled in America, and I think that's one of the legacies that I think he would have been most proud of. But like you said, Woodrow Wilson, the stroke, it should have gone to his vice president as sort of per convention / constitution. However, they said, no, we want him to run the country. He was paralyzed on his left side at the very least. He could barely talk and walk towards the end. So as much as you can admire Edith Wilson for being the first female president, in air quotes, what she did was a bit not that great. If it was on British TV, I'd use a lot of the stronger expletive. But yeah, FDR, obviously that kept hidden because, again, people back then had a lower view of disabled people. I mean, even up until a few years ago, there's still people who think disabled people are cursed by God or possessed by demons. It's a very tragic situation. Maybe not the case in 1940s America, but still very limited views on disability. So him being in a wheelchair, otherwise perfectly fine, as in coherent, no mental disabilities. I mean, Nixon tried to dig up the dirt on Kennedy, and I have no love for the Kennedys, but Nixon was dirty as well. I mean, even George McGovern had to replace Thomas Eagleton in the 72 election because it turned out he had electroshock therapy for depression. And then later Rosalind Carter would be instrumental in talking about mental health within America, and there's been a few presidents and first ladies whose families have died by suicide. Eleanor Roosevelt's father, Betty Ford's father. So I think that's an interesting discussion. However, I don't think Fetterman can be shielded from criticism because of his disability. His disability, I think, is one that could affect him in office, whereas FDR's wouldn't necessarily have had, but as Woodrow Wilson's would have affected him and did. He shouldn't be shielded from it.
Yeah, my general thing on this, because they were talking about, like, no, look, with the disabled folks, handicapped folks, you accommodate it to the best of your ability and then let somebody else sort it out. So just accommodate them, give them whatever you possibly can, let the voters figure it out and go from there. I think it's very interesting though. Like, there's no way Lincoln was not clinically depressed. If you've read like even a cursory, like that dude had depression.
And his wife as well.
Who had all sorts of, again, we don't want to diagnose, but she had a lot of issues. We'll leave it at that. And you
can't blame her. She outlived 3 of her children. She wasn't even allowed at her husband's bedside when he died because she was too hysterical. Well, obviously she's going to be hysterical because her husband's been shot in front of her. Bit kind of like Jackie Kennedy, but sort of, I think Jackie Kennedy's more praised because it's widely believed she did have PTSD. However, she wasn't the kind of emotional outwardly, and she kept it very quiet. I think if she'd been a bit more, say, hysterical, as we would call women like that, then it'd be different.
Yeah. Sarah Stook, we appreciate you. Always enjoy the conversation. Let folks know where they can follow you. We're going to link to the Mallard piece, but you got plenty of other stuff going on. You write in Elections Daily. You've got your Twitter. Tell folks where they can keep up with you.
I'm going to do a little Halloween thread after this about the White House and haunted royal places because it's Halloween and you got to get in the history. I'm doing a series on presidential runners-up. I've just written and sent in the 3rd piece of that for Elections Daily. And for the Mallard, I'm going to be doing about our Queen and Prince consorts, which will be fun because I always feel like we ignore everybody who isn't Henry VIII's wives.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward. We mentioned that last time we talked. We'll probably do an episode on that one because that'll be fun because everybody loves a little salacious royal scandal, and there's a couple of them involved in there.
Henry VIII was just sort of the surface of it when you look at like George II's mistresses.
It's always the quiet ones that get you when you start looking through history, the ones you think are super upright and they turn out to be the real, kinky weirdo people.
Yeah.
Not that we're going to judge. We're not going to judge. We're just going to report the facts.
Queen Victoria, 9 kids. She loved her husband. Let's just say that. She loved her husband very much.
God bless her and Albert. And mourned him. What was the story? She had his clothes laid out every day for the rest of her life. Something like that.
And she never wore anything
wore black.
And it actually made her unpopular because she never went out anywhere. And they were like, "Oh, you need to go out and do something." She's like, "No, I'm sad."
Hey, celebrity couple that actually loved each other. I'll take it however we can get it. Sarah Stook, it's always fun, my friend.
Royals who loved each other.
Yeah, rare thing these days. Appreciate you, my friend. Talk again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.